Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is all about serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, host of Kiffin's Keep and president of the London Lyceum, and as always, I'm excited to be here with you all today. And in this case, it's sort of a pseudo-live episode. I'm recording this with the people in the audience. However, I'm not going to post it immediately. I'll post it later on to make sure to add in the cool little intro music and the outro music, because I'm not technical enough to make sure I can do that in these live episodes. In today's episode, going to be covering a little bit of a couple of things. One is just the nature of renewal and retrieval, if that's a dead end for Baptists. Another is how we should treat our theological parents who depart from us or we depart from them, along with probably some questions along the lines of Matthew Barrett, who is, of course, the occasion for some of these things. So if you have questions, you can drop them a message here in the chat, and I can answer those. I know I've gotten a couple of questions already on Twitter. Some of them are just generic Q&A sort of stuff, so you can jump on to the end and you'll find out, I guess, some random questions that aren't related to anything that I've discussed here. So let's go ahead and jump in. So I've had people saying they have to pay for the app. The app is free. So we'll see. Anyway, let's jump in. So a couple of things that I wanted to focus on. I guess just let's go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. If you aren't aware, it has become now public consumption, or I guess public information, that Matthew Barrett, former professor at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, is no longer a professor there. Now he has taken a position with it's with the ACNA. What's the exact name of the school? I should know this, and yet here it is that I don't. So let me look it up while I'm here. It is Trinity Anglican Seminary, and he has been appointed as research professor of theology. It's a joint appointment where it's part-time there and part-time at the Anglican parish there in Kansas City. The school is in Pennsylvania. I'm not exactly sure how it works. I don't know if it's super relevant for this discussion anyway, but that's an occasion for a host of questions, and not all of them are questions that I want to engage in. Those are sometimes idle and unnecessary, and questions that lead more to gossip than lead to upbuilding and encouraging. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you can't ask questions. You should ask questions, but they're not always the best in certain formats. So what I wanted to focus on was, first of all, this news probably leaves a significant number of young men, especially, confused, hurting, in pain for all sorts of various reasons. Confused that, does this mean that you can't be a Baptist and be Catholic in the good sense? Hurting and in pain because he had a lot of PhD students. He attracted a lot of students to Midwestern, attracted a lot of students just in general to be interested in sort of the classical retrieval movement. And this kind of can be disorienting if you're not already an Anglican or something, especially if you're a Baptist. It can be disorienting. I just wanted to encourage people right now in this opportunity, because I think it's important and it matters, to remember that we don't choose our sort of theological parents, so to speak. Now, when it comes to theology, we have lots of fathers, we have lots of mothers. Some play outsized roles in comparison to others. And I know that there are countless people who've been introduced to deep and classical doctrine through people like Matthew Barrett. And so it can be disorienting if you're a Baptist and seeing somebody leave your tradition and say, why is that the case? Must I leave too if I care deeply about these doctrines? If I care deeply about being Catholic, if I care deeply about being Reformed, does this mean that I don't have a home or a place in Baptist life? And the answer is no. And it's a reminder, again, though, that we don't have control over who our parents are. The Lord in his providence stewards and gives us different people for different seasons. And sometimes we take different paths and sometimes they take different paths. And we shouldn't be embarrassed by that. That shouldn't make us ultimately sad. It should just remind us to cherish the good gifts that God gives us and the seasons that he gives us to them. He gives them to us. And in this case, it shouldn't be embarrassing if Matthew was a mentor for a season to you, if he was a theological parent to you for a season. We should honor those who are our parents and who went before us and who taught us and trained us and served us in that season, whether they have left our sort of theological fold or not. I mean, I think back to myself. I was sharing it with some friends. I owe a lot to a number of people that are drastically different from me. And in most cases, it was me who changed and not them. So, I grew up in college, a formative theological influence. I don't know how, if you follow some of this stuff, you probably know it would be, for me, it would be Stephen Furtick. And that's like diametrically opposed to pretty much everything that I think now. But he was actually part of the reason that I went to Southern, because he had gone to Southern, got his MDiv there. And so that was a catalyst for me pursuing theological education there. In a lot of ways, obviously, I'm significantly different. I would warn people away from him now, but he played an important role in my own theological formation. And I think it's right and good to say the Lord was kind and in directing me through that. But I want to honor people appropriately, even if I significantly, greatly disagree with them. And so I think there's a lot of people right now who are hurt, confused, who have seen Matthew as sort of a theological parent, but you could insert anybody here for this. This is just high profile in sort of the evangelical world. I get it. Outside of the evangelical bubble, no one knows anything about this, but this can apply to pretty much any scenario for you. Someone who's a theological mentor, a theological hero, a theological parent who changes in some respect, or you change in some respect, you can still honor them and understand that God used them in that season to help you. So I think that's the biggest takeaway that I wanted to just press home in this time, in this moment. And if you're watching this a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, you can be reminded that you, yes, you, even in your context, can be encouraged by the fact that God uses different people for different tasks and different seasons, and it's okay. And you don't have to be embarrassed. You can grieve, rightfully so, and be in pain, rightfully so, be angry at times, rightfully so, but do not let the sun go down on your anger. Remember to be grateful and to rejoice. Now, another question I think that is important for this particular context would be the nature of renewal and the retrieval movement. Does this mean that it's at a dead end for Baptists? Absolutely not. Does this mean you can't be Reformed? Does this mean you can't be Catholic as a Baptist? Absolutely not. The Center for Baptist Renewal and I think the London Lyceum hopefully are institutions that prove that this is the case. You can be Baptist and robustly Catholic, robustly Reformed, and pursue the renewal and retrieval movement with all the vigor that you have without having to leave the Baptist tradition. That's a false dichotomy to think it's either or, that you must either be a Baptist or pursue this renewal movement. And I'm sure that's one of the unfortunate things about large platform figures, is that when things happen like this, they can be an opportunity to swing pendulums. And I'm sure you'll see large other personalities kind of swing the pendulum and see, I told you so. And yeah, maybe there is a I told you so in this case, but that doesn't change the fact that the entire project, the broader project of retrieval and renewal, has nothing to do with any of this, and it's not hindered by any of these things. And I hope even the the journal symposium we put together 2 years ago now on the Reformation as renewal is proof that you need not agree with every jot and tittle of everybody in the movement to understand that there's value and there's an opportunity as Baptists or as Presbyterians or as other classically Protestant Reformed denominations to pursue in your own tradition this task without needing to swim to the Tiber or the Thames or anything else. You can stay firmly within your own tradition because there's beauty and there's a virtue in staying within your own tradition. I've talked about this before with other high-profile characters like Dale Partridge, who seems to change his position on things every 6 months, that you should be afraid and stay away from those who are unstable in all their ways. They have no firm foundation. But the truth is, a lot of these people move for emotional reasons, for vocational reasons, and some of them, it makes sense, you get it, but they're not truly deeply theological reasons. And it's a reminder that your own tradition doesn't take a hit because some high-profile person leaves. It may very well not have been for a theological reason at all, or anything that has to do with your own tradition. So don't feel like the Baptist tradition or any other tradition is suddenly hampered because somebody leaves it and crosses to another denomination or anything like that. And as a reminder, as long as you're within these Protestant boundaries, there's reasons. We link arms and understand that there's these creedal sort of ecumenical aspects that we all share together, and we should all rejoice. And I'll leave it at that. I want to move to also remember just to love your own tradition, to care about your own tradition, to value your own tradition, to be happy to stay as a Baptist or whatever else that you are. and to not always think, oh, the grass is greener over here, because it's not. It's almost never greener. Everybody has their own warts, everybody has their own issues. And the Lord in His providence has placed you in a particular tradition, and you should be nurtured in that tradition so long as you are not convicted by your conscience to depart for various reasons. But I do think it's interesting that in the return to creedal Christianity, the emphasis on that, it seems that there has been a lack of, or maybe a ignorance or a downplaying of confessional Christianity, sort of the Christianity that's out like a little bit broader circle, right? The inner circle will be the ecumenical stuff. The broader circle is going to be that confessional type things, because it's interesting that someone of this profile could be teaching at an institution that teaches things diametrically opposed to another institution, and you can go from one to the other in a seamless transition. We should be reminding and prioritizing and championing our distinctives, not in a begrudgingly ignorant way, not in a way that wants to beat people over the head. We can understand that we are linking arms in all sorts of different projects and ways without downplaying our distinctives. We can recognize them, champion them, and lean into them as they should be, because that's what makes our traditions what they are, and it allows us to form people in particular ways that give us different gifts that all serve ultimately the global body of Christ. So we should lean into this. And it reminds me of what seems, at least on the online world, some of the content that I've seen in some of the press releases about this, how Matthew would leave because of the liturgy of the Anglican Church and everything. Of course, you can be a Baptist or a Presbyterian or other Protestant denominations and have the same rich liturgy. There's nothing inherently anti-Baptist about any of these things. I've done videos about this in the past. You can have this high liturgy in a Baptist church. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's nothing against that. And so you should just remind yourself that you don't have to leave. Okay, I think Brandon Smith and Luke Stamps and those guys with the Center for Baptist Renewal, they make fun how this is sort of their tagline, unofficial tagline. You don't have to leave. You can still be a Baptist. And that's true, because a lot of the reasons people leave the Baptist faith is not because of actual Baptist doctrine. It's because of other things that are not incompatible, but maybe they thought they were. And another reminder is just in general, the conversions, high-profile conversions, I think it's concerning to have high-profile conversions that lead to an automatic position in another high-profile location. I don't care who you are. I think if you make a significant theological change and you are employed at doing a certain type of theological work, whether that's a pastor or a professor, you should not go immediately into another denomination and begin teaching in this capacity. I think that's unwise, and that's really weird and concerning that leaders would think that's a good idea. Someone who's changed significantly on that level of detail should not be teaching and given authority like that in another denomination. At least that's my take anyway. So those are some just general overview comments that I wanted to make now. And I wanted to prioritize, again, that we don't get to choose our theological parents, our theological mentors, and we can be grateful for what they've given us in that season. The Lord is kind. The Lord knows how to give good gifts to us, and we could trust that despite what we may think, what we may be experiencing at this moment, that it was for our good that we had these things. I have my significant disagreements before and after the announcement of Barrett, obviously. I don't think that's news to anyone. I mean, he blocked me a long time ago, even though the only time he tweeted about me was positive for my Journal of Reformed Theology article. But we'll leave it aside. This is not for social commentary. This is more sort of like trying to encourage you in these various things. But I'm going to look at a couple of other questions. I mean, naturally, there's going to be questions. And I don't think you can't ignore the fact that there's going to be questions about confessional, denominational identity, particularly with Midwestern. I don't have the knowledge to be able to answer all those questions, so I'm not trying to do that. I mean, I feel like I've got a decent grasp on some things, but I don't have all the insider information, and I don't think it's necessary for me to do that. That's not my role. He's not in my church. He's no longer in my denomination. He's not in like my institutional network. So like, I don't feel like I should be the one making those judgments. We'll let others make those judgments. Obviously, you can pontificate in various concepts and ask legitimate questions, but the point here again is to hopefully encourage these things and to remind us that there's riches in all of our traditions, especially for me, a Baptist tradition. We should be encouraged to stay Baptist. And we've got some cool merch that we've been working on for a little while about staying Baptist that you'll see soon if you want to support us and our work here. We haven't done a sort of fundraiser in about 2 years, and we're at a point where we need to do another one of those because there are some pressing projects that we've had that we've been working on that naturally require funds. There's a lot of things that we have to turn down because we can't do it just because we don't have the funds, and we want to be able to create more content and resources to help people not only stay Baptist, but to encourage the entire Protestant faith in the proper mode. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and look at a couple of the questions that I received, and I'll just talk to them. Some of them, they weren't related to this at all. So I got like questions about what's the strongest argument for credo and paedo baptism in your opinion. I've got a video on why credo baptism is right, paedo baptism is wrong. I would go check that out for what I think is the strongest argument. I make an argument based on Galatians 3:16 that I think is the most profound for me as a Baptist, as far as the paedo Baptist argument that I think is the strongest. And I think it's just sort of the continuity of the covenants, the continuity of church history. And I actually think the Genesis 17 to Acts 2 is actually a pretty good argument, strong argument, in my opinion. I think a book that doesn't get enough credit for paedo baptism would be William the Baptist. It's a funny little story, and it can be persuasive in particular contexts. I'm not trying to, of course, advocate for paedo baptism, so I don't want to recommend it too strongly, but I don't think anybody should be afraid of the truth, and so you should be able to read other people's works and ideas without fear, and you should be able to engage them openly and honestly. The other questions that came through: where can you pinpoint the anti-intellectual movement in the American church? I have no idea. I'm not a good enough historian to be able to tell you exactly where or when that happened. It seems that America has always sort of had a little bit of an anti-intellectual spirit, but I can't really. George Marsden and other people have done a lot of work on this, and I can't comment authoritatively or intelligently on that very well. Do you have resources on the North Fundamentalist movement? I do not. Matthew Schrader is somebody who might. He's a professor at, what's the Central Baptist, maybe in Minnesota. He's done a lot of work in that area, especially among Baptists. I would look to him and some of his work there. But there's other content out there that I would have to go find and engage. Naturally, I got questions about, does this mean Matthew Barrett became Anglican? Well, I assume so. If you're member now of a church and you've been preaching there or whatever, then yeah, I would think you're Anglican. Maybe you're not convictionally Anglican, but you at least are outwardly. Talking about whether holding to classical theism and the great tradition leads us away from Baptist conviction. So of course that was part of the comments that I was trying to make here, was that no, classical theism, no, the great tradition, none of that stuff should lead you away from the Baptist tradition. To me, that's just a misunderstanding of what the great tradition is, a misunderstanding of what classical theism is, if you think that that is going to require you to leave the Baptist tradition. I don't think that's true in any sense. You don't have to leave the Baptist tradition. You don't have to leave any other Protestant tradition. John Henry Newman's wrong. In this case, if Matthew Barrett's leaving because of that, he's wrong. I don't know if that's really why he's leaving. You'll have to ask him. But a lot of this will come out as sort of a PR sort of aspect of, see, you don't have to be a Baptist, or you can't be a Baptist and do these things. And that's just absolutely wrong in every sense. You can be a Baptist, full-throated Baptist, and be all about being a Catholic, all about being a Catholic in the good sense, all about being Reformed and confessional and creedal and all these things. You don't have to leave. It doesn't lead you down that path. You don't have to be a revisionist in all these different ways in order to be a Baptist. Any other questions? Let's see. Nope, I think that looks to be mostly it. So hopefully this was useful in some sense, a little bit encouraging, maybe a different than others. I know I saw some other people doing some live reactions, and I'm not trying to be like the news here. I'm trying to use these different occasions to address important and useful topics in a useful way. That doesn't mean that I'm afraid of engaging sort of critically. I think anybody who follows along knows that I'm not afraid to engage critically. You just try to do it in the appropriate manner. There's a way to do things. And not every, so I think it's just sort of like the Aristotelian mean, sort of, right? You know, got to know the right time, the right context, the right way, how to handle everything. I think in this time, in this context, you look at people who are in pain and who are hurting, who are confused, and you say, no, it's okay. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to be in pain. And you don't have to leave. You don't have to give up this project. You don't have to get frustrated and quit. And I get, you're going to have those feelings. And that's appropriate to have those feelings if you've had deep personal relationships where you feel led astray or whatever, you feel like you were lied to or whatever it is. but you don't have to leave. There's so many great people, so many good things going on, so many great thinkers right now engaged in this project, especially within the Baptist tradition. It's just a powerhouse, in my opinion. So many awesome people. And people who aren't deeply engaged in this quite yet, they may not realize the breadth of thinking and the breadth of awesome people doing great work right now in this area. And I think it's a distraction to focus too much on all these other aspects. There are legitimate denominational trustee sort of questions that should be answered, of course. I'm just not the person to ask those questions, and I'm not the person to answer them. I think my role here in this context is to encourage and to challenge people to stay Baptist or to stay whatever tradition it is that you are. I'm not the guy trying to convert people to become other traditions. That's not me. I think there's beautiful things in all the traditions, and I want to uplift them and encourage them and say, wow, that's amazing. I look at the Wesleyan tradition, or I look at the Presbyterian tradition, or whatever it is, the Anglican tradition, and I think, wow, there's great things going on there. I want to encourage those and uplift those and say, that's awesome. We need strong other traditions like that in the Protestant faith. We need them, and we want to encourage them and say, you guys are doing great things. I disagree on some issues, and that's totally fine. I'm happy for you and your own tradition, and I want to continue to support you in every way that I possibly can. But I also want to know that I can keep my Baptist tradition alive and healthy and growing. So hopefully this makes sense and is useful in some context, in some way. I know. Let's see here. Any other questions here from anybody? I will look one more second. Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe some comments will probably around Thomas Aquinas and if he's done stuff like guys, Thomas Aquinas, like if you really were all about Thomas, you'd be a Roman Catholic right now. So like he's irrelevant. He's a red herring. Let's not go down that trail. I don't think you have to be a Thomist to be either classical, to be confessional, to be creedal, to be any of these things. Thomas obviously is coming around 1200. So obviously if you want to be Chalcedonian, all these other things, you don't have to be a Thomist. The Thomism is one way to approach this among several legitimate options. And I know that there is a school in this sort of like pop renewal movement that sort of thinks that's the only way, and that's one of the criticisms that I had of the Barrett's Reformation is Renewal book, as he sort of makes this is the pure and best way, and maybe it is, but it's not the only way. So you don't have to be a Thomist. You can be all these other sort of traditions, and it's good and it's awesome, and we should encourage them, encourage vibrant intellectual retrieval and engagement with these things. If you look at the Reformed tradition, it's eclectic on all this. It's got all the people all across the different spectrum. Obviously, within a bounded spectrum, there are guardrails here that you're not going over and doing silly, dumb things. I saw some video of William Lane Craig saying something silly again where God can learn or something as omniscient. Like, that's not how this works. Okay, guys, that's outside the bounds of what we should be saying and what we should be thinking. So I'll go ahead and pause it for now. Hopefully this is useful, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.